as we acknowledge our presence here, our mentors and the mentors of the SSP, we give you thanks, dear Lord, and so be it. So, as we were saying, we would like to first of all give thanks to Kirsten for the continuation of presenting these beautiful chapters of this book, Times of Health and Conscientiousness. She is already on part 2, chapter 4, in which she'll be talking to us about conflict and conscientiousness. Kirsten, please.
You guys hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for all of you being here today. Slight little thing. You know, this is interesting that this happened. Before I actually begin, this is actually a really good segue into this talk, because we work so much on our own stuff that it's hard for us to see the little imperfections, or in this case, it's a typo. And that's why oftentimes you may have found yourself at work asking a coworker, hey, can you just double check and read this real quick for me? Can you proofread for me before I send it out, or make sure there's no errors? You might have done this in class, in your times and in your school days, wanting to hand in an important paper. Or even you could be nowadays, it's all about text messages. Sometimes you might be with a friend and say, or you might be with your partner, your husband or wife or what have you. You might say, hey, can you read this real quick before I send it? Does it make sense? And we do that. Why? Because much like I just unintentionally showed us, we don't always see things. We don't always see what is inside of us. Sometimes we get blindsided. Today's discussion is about conflict and conscientiousness. And for those of you who are on the web, and you may not, obviously you're not seeing this, but I have given those who are here present a copy of this chapter. Today's lecture will be super interactive and really will require you all to be listening as we read the text. And you also have it at your literal fingertips for reference, and I will have it on the PowerPoint slide. And we're going to talk about this together. And the reason we chose or inspired, we would like to think, to do it this way is for a couple reasons. One, because conflict is something we all have, and conflicts that we all carry with us are the source of a lot of our ailments, our illnesses, and our unhappiness. This is what drives a lot of our healthcare system, because we go out and we seek, our medical providers, and there's nothing wrong with that. And even the alternative medicine came out of folks or people having conflicts that we say modern medicine or allopathic medicine has not been able to fully resolve their issue. So many times people will do yoga, will do meditation to try to find that inner peace. Conflict is something that every single person experiences without a shadow of a doubt. Every person will experience this or have the opportunity to develop this, we should say. But we want to be clear about something, because when you think of the word conflict, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? What picture comes to your mind? Indecision, okay. A battle. A battle usually occurs between two people, right? Okay. Confusion. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's important for us to understand what kind of conflict we're talking about here. Because just like Gianni mentioned a battle, oftentimes when we think about conflict, we think about two people having an issue, to coworkers, or I don't want to call people out, but let's say maybe someone comes to you for some yoga and says, "Oh, I'm having this issue with my mother," and we think about two people, right? But in this chapter, conflict, as Joanna refers to it, is not about the conflict between two individuals. It's not about the conflict between two people. It is about the conflict within us as an individual. And any good therapist or healthcare provider, or more so I would say therapist, will know and point us more in the direction to go in ourselves, rather paying attention to something exterior. So in this chapter, Joanna does not discuss the conflicts of two nations, between your neighbor and yourself, between your dog and your sister's dog, or whatever conflicts you may have at work. This is about internal conflicts. Of course, Joanna is so poetic. She's so poetic. And we're going to read this, and then we're going to talk. But watch how poetically Joanna puts all of this in a very deep and intentional way. She says, all the individuals' processes of anthropological evolution and psychological acquisitions sleep in the depths of the unconscious in the form of experiences. Each time an experience could not be assimilated, understood or processed, it got stored in the deep archives of the unconscious. It remains there to probably emerge later as a conflict. Conflicts also result from unfulfilled ambitions, frustrated desires, and inner manifestations that were repressed without the help of reason. When human beings emerge from the primal stages, they live temporarily on the border between instinct and discernment of what is feasible to accomplish. We wanted to highlight something here. Let's just read the next little portion. See, this doesn't work. Once they have become used to automatic phenomena, they do not always have the moral strength to overcome that limitation, from which arise uncertainties and doubts that become complex emotional conflicts. Layman's terms, what is she talking about here? I don't know. Well, here. This first part, we carry with us from one life to the next in our deep unconscious in the form of experiences. For we carry with us all the experiences from one life to the next. And those experiences which we are unable to process or understand get deeply archived in our unconscious mind. Unconscious, let's leave it at that. To later possibly be triggered as a conflict, re-emerge as a conflict. And she gives examples here, which we think are not, what is the word? It is not all-inclusive. I'm sure that there are other things too. But she said conflict can result from unfulfilled ambitions. In my senior year of high school, I had a incredibly intelligent, articulate, bright professor in chemistry. He could quote the periodic table. He seemed as though he probably was one of those people who went home on a Friday night and played games specific to the periodic table. He just really seemed involved in chemistry was a part of who he was. However, He was an incredibly unhappy person. And anyone that took his class knew that. And he was quite miserable and rude and degrading at times, and a lot of other things about him that were rather unpleasant to take his class. However, one day in our senior year, we decided that for whatever reason, we wanted to learn chess. You guys know what the game of chess is, right? I forget what to call it. Xadrez. To play chess. So, long story short, me, myself, and a bunch of other students, we actually got to know his life story. He began to actually talk to us. There was about 5 or 6 of us, give or take, who were learning with him because he was an expert chess player. And he began to tell us his personal story. And so his life, the big drama of his life, was that he was, interestingly enough, he was in medical school. He was in his 2nd or 3rd year of medical school. And he started out by telling us this story by saying that, look, I've always had this ability. He said, I don't call myself a seer or medium or witch or any of those terms. I just know that from a very young age, I've been able to see and know things before they happen, and when things are happening and others are trying to hide it from me. So he said, as he grew up, he knew he wanted to work in medicine. He gets into medical school. He falls in love with a young woman, wants to marry her, but he's in his 3rd year. And he says he starts to have these images come to him, as they always do, in different ways, shapes, or forms, where he sees this vision of his girlfriend being unfaithful to him. Long story short, he confronts her. She admits to it. They break up. And he's completely debilitated after that. And at that point in time, during his year of the 3rd year or 2nd year of his medical school, one of the classes he was taking, amongst many, was chemistry. And because of that, he failed, because he had gotten so emotionally disturbed because of this. He failed that class, and he had to retake chemistry. So that kind of became like the mark of Cain, if you will. It became so like a hallmark, a stain in his life. He could never, although he didn't admit this, it was quite obvious to the rest of us, that here was this man close to retirement, and this had happened to him 30 years prior. A singular incident that he continued and reverberated this inner conflict within him. He said he was never able to get over that infidelity. He was never able to find someone who he could be happy with. And he always seemed to carry that anger around. One small thing, and we say small respectively, because for those who endure infidelity is a big thing. This can be very painful, very hurtful, so we don't want to minimize that. But one small thing happened to him 30 years ago. Now, still incredibly unhappy, admitting this to us, his pupils in his chess class, he was still really unhappy. So to us, that is a perfect example of unfulfilled ambitions for 2 reasons. It was his dream to be a physician. And he said he was never able to fulfill his dream. He said he was never able to, again, get his mind right to try to go back to a different medical school or try to remedy it. And his other dream was to get married and have kids, have a family. That's what he wanted with his life. Those 2 things he lived out. It was palpable. And to be one of his students, to go into his room, go into his classroom, and to see how miserable he was. Highly intelligent, very, 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 very smart and articulate. But also really sad for those of us who are watching him. Here was this person who was going into his retirement years soon, and he would never, as far as I knew, things could have changed, never resolve those issues. never resolve those issues. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, through the blessing of Facebook, a friend of mine, well, let's say acquaintance of mine through high school, had posted something about going to a previous professor's retirement party. And so I recalled her being in the same class as me. I reached out to her out of pure curiosity. Who was this person? And she indeed was telling it was this professor. He indeed had not changed. He was the same way. Don't know the story behind why she was going to his retirement, but neither here nor there. It's sad. And just by a show of hands, is there anyone here that wants to live like that? To live like this individual? No, nobody does. Do you think he wants to live like that? No. But are we conscientious enough to work on that conflict? That is the key. Was he aware? Could he have been aware? Could have. We don't know. And in this instance, we are examining this case study purely for the sake of this conversation. But we really hope that as we are talking, as we're reading this, that we don't do what most of us do, myself included, when we read these kind of texts, as we start thinking about other people's conflicts, like, oh yes, I know this person, my third cousin has this issue, or my aunt in the family, she's so miserable. This is not what Joanna wants us to do. She doesn't want to take in this knowledge. She doesn't want us to take in this knowledge, Spiritist information, and think about others. She wants us to internalize it for us to think questions, which we're going to get to here in a second. We're going to pose these questions. But if, without answering out loud, just for something for you to think about, if you could think about one conflict you're having right now, one inner conflict, emotional conflict, or what have you, something that bothers you, you could probably think of at least one or two that you know off the top of your head like that, quick. Because what ends up happening in a lot of these conflicts, they stay with us until we choose to do something about it, which we're going to talk about. Joanna says, ingrained behaviors and insecurity lie buried in the unconscious, where they remained as tormenting impulses and perturbing complexes that promote the unhappiness of those who experience their constriction. So this case study, let's call him Professor B. Or rather, take that back. Think about myself, ourselves. What ingrained behavior do you have? What is something that you do automatically every day? You may not realize it. So for those of you who have a partner or a best friend or someone who has spent a great amount of time around you, knows you really well, what would they say is an ingrained behavior about you? Isabella, what would you say is an ingrained behavior, a behavior that is so deeply a part of who you are, you may not even realize that you do it? So I'll give an example about myself, since Isabella's not answering me. I'm just picking on her. So I'll use an example of something I don't do anymore because that's what I'm comfortable with saying. So allegedly, my husband told me, like, allegedly, about 10 years ago when I first, no, I'd say 8 years ago when we moved in together, I think it was 10 years ago, whatever it was. He allegedly states that I used to put my wet towels on our bed, allegedly. And sometimes I would, before a shower, I would put my clothes on the bathroom floor, which I think I still do, so never mind about that one. But definitely the towels on the bed. I do not personally recall this at this stage, but I believe that I did those things. He brought it to my attention and I made the modifications, but they were behaviors. Now, there might be certain behaviors that I do that doesn't bother you. But it may bother other people, which is not the discussion we're having here today. Joanna just wants us to look at, if I ask each one of you right now, what is a behavior that you have, or what is a behavior that you have that either someone else has told you have and you're unaware of it, or that you are aware, but you're aware of it, but you can't stop from doing it. And it could be a positive or a negative. If I were to ask you, what would it be? Jeanette says she has too many.
Yeah, excuse myself. Which one of those? Excuse. I can see so many things, wrong with myself, and I love to change them, but I keep giving excuse to them. Oh, this is because of that. Oh, this is because of that, and I never change them, but they bother me. But I think it's gonna be okay in the end. But I never change.
Interesting. Thank you for being brave enough to share that. Anybody else? Now, if I were to ask you, what is an ingrained behavior you notice in your spouse, girlfriend, partner, whatever, what comes to mind? Does anything come to mind? You don't have to share it, but does anything come to mind? Just let me know. Just show your hand. Does something come to mind? You don't have to share it. Nothing? We just for the audience who isn't present, we have two. Well, technically we have 4 sets of couples here, but 2 that are interacting. Well, Leah's in there. Well, no, I can ask Isabella. I don't want you to say, but so there's 3 sets. So nobody has anything. No, wow. You guys must have. What's that?
You went to therapy.
No, so no, that's okay. So yeah, no. Yes. No, that's okay. No. We don't want you to share. We don't want you to share. But there is something, right? At some point. Yeah. But the point I wanted to bring up is that notice how quickly we're able to pick out our spouses much more quickly than we can our own. Did anyone perceive that? Yeah. Is that an issue?
Yeah.
Vlad says it could be. Why could it be an issue? Jeanette, can you give him the mic? If you wanted to elaborate, why could it be an issue? Possibly.
Because we tend to protect ourselves, and it's easier for us to see problems in other people rather than on us.
Yeah.
And that is part of the healing process, right? But if you don't come up to that conclusion, it's hard. That's why that issue can last for years. Because maybe we avoid to get knowledge to that problem too, right? Maybe, I don't know.
No,
maybe you don't want to face that issue.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah. Well, hold on, Gianna, before you take the mic, let me ask him a follow-up question. Do you think that's why it's so beneficial for us to live with others or within a social environment? And is that something, not just as a couple, but as people that live amongst the society, that we should listen to those who care about us if they point out something to us?
Well, yeah, definitely. Because if you
Those who can't see,
isolate
Sami's
yourself,
eyes are like, I'm just teasing. Go ahead.
if you isolate yourself, if you don't have friends or no
Yes.
one to share your concerns and thoughts, it's harder.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Vlad.
Yeah. Even if you have a pet, Pet helps.
A pet,
You can talk to your pet.
a pet can help.
Even a pet.
Pets are very
Something.
therapeutic.
Exactly.
They are, especially Chloe. She's so, Chloe, right? She's so sweet. Yes. Chloe, for those who don't know, Chloe is the dog of Vlad and Samia. Absolutely. She's so sweet. So, so sweet. Yes.
But in the sense that at least put it out. Of course, your dog won't say you anything, but
Of course.
at least you're putting out. That could be part of the solution.
Yeah. Oh, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I think sometimes we don't perceive that goes unnoticeable by ourselves because the other one can get used to that kind of thing and favor. Sometimes the person favors from that. Or because if it's annoying, you're gonna let the person know right away. You know what I mean? Like I remember when we first got together, you wouldn't sit for breakfast because previously he wouldn't take the breakfast at home because he didn't want to miss the bus to go to work. So he did it everything at the counter, ready, go. And I said, "What? You're not gonna sit with me and have breakfast together?" You know, but that is, but for me and my family, that's very important. It's the meal time is very important. And here, who has lunch at home? You know, not everybody unless you work from home.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Dinner is important to sit and share the day, kind of, So I think it's not a bad thing, It's not a bad thing but at the same time, if you are in a family, you want everybody to be reunited at least at that time. So
Yeah.
But that's not imperfection.
no, it's not an imperfection.
It's
No, but this is the thing. I consider that as he would be there by himself doing it alone. So I felt isolated. Why doesn't he sit and have breakfast with me?
This is a good example. So this example, I would say, Joni, is thank you for sharing. First of all, I know it's not always easy to share things. It's a great example because when we have a conflict between two people, and remember, today's talk is not about a conflict between two people. It's about the conflict that arises within ourselves. So that if I were to use that as an example, and forgive me and allow me to utilize your example, if I were to analyze that and say, well, how is this applicable to what Joanna is saying? I would say, don't think about what Aloysio, don't think about what your partner was doing, but think about why it bothers you. Right. Right. So absolutely. So it's a rhetorical question, but it's for us to think about because oftentimes we think about, oh, this person is doing X and it's making me feel Y or Z, D, whatever. But what Joanna is saying is going inside of ourselves and analyzing the things that torment us, that bother us. That is a habit. So for instance, this is a very poor example, perhaps, but it's one that I can think off the top of my head that I'm willing to share. We really like chocolate chip cookies. So, but we don't want to eat them. But we want them. But we know if we eat them, we're going to continue to gain weight. So it's tormenting because my 5-year-old loves them, but I have to stare at them every day when I come downstairs to my kitchen area and see them. And the impulse inside of me is to go get it. And then this other part of me is like, nope, can't do it. So it's just a small example. And I'll give you another example, how this can be illustrated in your family dynamic. I'll give the example of my late father, since he's no longer on this earth, and I like to think that he'll forgive me if I say anything wrong or bad. So for example, when I was a teenager, my father would say something and he would express his views on something, or he would just say something and I didn't agree with it. My impulse as a teenager was to react, talk back, give my opinion. But I knew better that his anger was explosive. So I knew I had to constantly watch myself and say, okay, you're hearing him say this. Don't say anything. Just remain quiet. Let him say, be respectful. So it was always this constant inner battle until I reached close to my 30s. Shamefully, but it is what it is. That's the level that I'm at, admittedly. We share this because this happens to all of us. This is what she's talking about. Those ingrained behaviors that we have that torment us, and they make us unhappy. Because ultimately, when we find peace within ourselves, as I got older and I did my own internal work on myself, yoga helps a lot, tremendous amount for calming, centering yourself. Joanna does mention yoga, meditation, prayer, all these things help. Finding that inner peace within me, I was able to be around my late father and not be disturbed. Okay, Daniel has a question, comment? Oh, don't touch this, sorry. Ooh, something fell. Did you have something else?
Just people has been very participative.
Should I pull it up on here?
Yeah, I can put it here in the.
Do you want me to put it on the screen here?
It's
Or
up
you
to
can do it?
I can read.
Okay,
I can
go
read. There have some comments here from Antonia, Orland, Gray, and Ivone. So, Orland, first he asked what he referred to the same as habit, like when you ask about, behaviors that your
Yes, it
partner
is,
has.
Orlando, the same as a habit. Yes, ingrained behaviors.
Antonia
Yeah.
mentioned about my husband said that let me put it here.
I keep forgetting
that I
about
keep
not to
forgetting
get
about
toothpaste.
not getting
To not put
toothpaste on the
hand towels.
towel. And you can read from that.
Yes, and Orlando, he mentions, this is a great example. He mentions, this made me think of the parable about getting the splinter from our own eye, but for the log in somebody else's. Exactly. Yvonne says, sometimes a personality trait that you might consider a strength, someone else can see it as a weakness. As a result, it might become a conflict between two individuals. Great point, Yvonne. And just for us to reiterate, this chapter is about our own internal conflicts and not about the conflicts between two people. And specifically, Joanna says, and let me flip back here, this is about our own ingrained behaviors and insecurity that lie within the unconscious, where they remain as tormenting impulses and perturbing complexes that promote the unhappiness, that make us unhappy for those who experience it in their constriction. So we're not talking about perceived strengths or weaknesses here. This is not what Joanna's talking about. So she's talking about actual behaviors within me, myself, and I, each one of us. Let's go on. She says a conflict is the certainty or uncertainty about what to do or not do, which always causes imbalance and affliction. I'm going to read that again. A conflict is the certainty or uncertainty about what to do or not do, which always causes imbalance and affliction. Undigested, a conflict becomes an emotional expression of maladjustment, manifesting as organic dystonias that open the way for various diseases. So when we do not process those conflicts that can go into our unconscious, they can manifest as illnesses in various forms, as various diseases, as Joanna says. She refers to it as a parasite. A vigorous parasite. The conflict must be identified and eliminated. Every time something dark appears in the area of the emotions because of fear, ignorance, pressure, or weakness, it may become a conflict later. Every time something dark appears in the area of the emotions, because of fear, ignorance, pressure, or weakness, it can become a conflict later. We shared this example once before of the gentleman who was a husband and wife, their 2 kids, a husband, his pregnant wife, and their 2 kids, after dinner decided to go get ice cream, their local ice cream shop. And as the husband was driving there, they were hit by a drunk driver. His wife was killed instantly, so was the baby, and the 2 children in the back seat. When he lost consciousness, when he woke up, he could see that they were all clearly gone. And he said when he got his consciousness back, he was able to see the teenager who was drunk in the car that was smashed into his. And he said in that quick instant, when I became aware, when I woke up from being unconscious, for a split second, I realized I had a choice in that moment to hate this individual, this teenager, for the rest of my life, for killing my wife and unborn child and my 2 kids in the back seat. I could hate him for the rest of my life. Or I had another option. I could forgive him for his ignorance and not live so unhappily. And he chose the latter. He chose in that moment forgiveness. And everything that unfolded the rest of his life, he wrote a book, he went on a book tour. After this young 17-year-old, he did spend time in jail. After he got out of jail, he helped him, even though he was the cause of the death of his wife, unborn child, and 2 kids. He helped him become acclimated, and they went on tour together to promote the understanding of how drugs and alcohol can really affect people's lives. So we bring this example because if this gentleman had decided he was going to hold hate, anger, whatever it was in his heart, it's going to appear, it's going to become a conflict within him for the rest of his life. And that's why when people talk about forgiveness not, when we forgive someone else, it's not for them, it's for us to be set free. Because when I hold on to anger, when I don't forgive, it's like I'm the one taking the poison. Something for us to think about. She goes on to say, however, there is actual conflict when the conscience does not possess the light of discernment, still in the dark. It lets itself be guided solely by intelligence or instincts and remains directionless. I'm going to read that again. However, there is actual conflict only when the conscience does not possess the light of discernment, still in the dark. It lets itself be guided solely by the intelligence or instincts, remains directionless. What does this mean? We asked a question earlier about if you could name an ingrained behavior within you that bothers you. And Vlad mentioned, then I also asked the question, could you name one about your spouse? And by maybe a few seconds faster, we could say we could probably name things a little bit quicker, possibly, about our partner than ourselves. And Vlad pointed out how it is difficult to make those changes within ourselves. Can we all agree on that? Like it is difficult to, modify, however small those things are. But when we're in the dark, Joanna says, and we're just living by instinct and just living day to day, directionless, it brings us to some questions. What is a conflict? Where does it come from? How often do I, these are questions for ourselves, how often do I experience conflict or conflicts? And how do I potentially resolve the conflict? So if I were to poll the audience, what is a conflict? How do you define what a conflict is? Let me give you the mic real quick.
Something that depends on a decision of yours. You have to decide, take a direction on it, one direction, other one. So I think I like the example that you gave, because that was hard for that man. And he was very conscious, spiritually saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Spiritism helped us a lot with that.
Absolutely.
Because I think I don't know if it is still in the context, but I think the Spiritism, because the idea of reincarnation, so you think outside of the box. So maybe there is a reason why that happened,
Mm.
So the Spiritism, I think in my case, has helped me a lot in those not that type of situation, because that's really extreme, but to some extent, give me better judgment, and avoid being irrational.
You said something very important there.
Yeah.
So what would be the option? What would be the opposite of being irrational?
Being conscient, and having a good judgment.
Being rational.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing. That is very much key. Go ahead, Jeanette.
See, it's very interesting. First of all, I have to apologize to Gianni, because I have no right to interfere in her comments. And then it was a conflict, because she was saying something that I was not agree. Oh my God, this was not, and then should I say something? Should I stop? Then when you go and do it, you regret. Then a conflict is something that you have, for more that you analyze, and you try to have the best decision. And when you decide to do it, maybe it was not the best one. And then, then you go to the 0 point. Then that is my conflict today, but I'm very sorry. But yeah, it's something that you cannot decide. It's very difficult. And when you decide, oh, this is going to be that consequence, that's going to be that consequence, and you see consequence in every decision that you made it, and how it's going to be.
So in other words, like the phrase goes, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. That's what conflict is. When we are conflicted, when we need to make a decision, because we are thinking beings. We're always doing things, moving forward in our lives. So it's that idea of that inner conflict where there's a fork in the road. Do I go this way? Do I go that way? Part of me wants to go this way. The other part of me wants to go that way. Where does that come from? Where does that conflict come from? Your mind? Your thinking mind? Yourself? Your person?
Yeah. Sometimes you are not your mind and your thoughts. You are more than that. So sometimes when you just listen to the mind, you have lots of conflict. If you start listening to your heart, to your essence, maybe you have less conflicts, because you will be in tune with your true self, I guess.
Beautifully said. And Joanna does touch on that. And let's actually move on to that. That's a great segue. Joanna says, human existence is a constant challenge. Joanna's not pessimistic. She's not negative. We believe her to be a realist. Every challenge requires effort for the struggle. When individuals recoil from a trying experience, they lose the chance to affirm their values at the expense of their personal growth. So I want to touch on what somebody just said. You know, when we sometimes become overly rational and we don't use that balance of our emotional self, our heart. We use too much of our mind and don't balance it out with the heart. That in and of itself is an indication, if someone comes to that realization, that they are conscious, that they are self-aware. But oftentimes we're living in that shadow or that darkness, and we don't realize we live at such an instinctual level. That's why it's important for us to have friends, have a community, to be able to have someone that loves us enough to say, I see that you're doing this. Look at it as a different perspective. Open your eyes to something potentially different. And ultimately, Joanna says here, when we recoil, meaning when we decide not to deal with something, our own conflicts, there's a lost opportunity for us to work on ourselves. Obstacles and hard to grasp concepts are skill building tools. When the mind gets blocked, people stop moving forward and they get lost in a tangle of fears and insecurities. Therefore, they need to use logic in order to act, weigh the possibilities and produce, working for their inner growth, which is responsible for the psychophysical harmony of their evolutionary process. So it is interesting because oftentimes it is not so much that, or I should say, most of the time, we get bogged down by our own regrets, guilt. What is the other word, Daniel, we were talking about? Self-pity. Surrounding that particular conflict within ourselves, that we're unable to move on. That's what Joanna refers to, a tangle of fears and insecurities. When the mind gets blocked, when our ability to rationalize, when our ability to rationalize the situation, we get so wrapped up in the emotion of something, we're unable to utilize that logic for our own inner growth. Let's give an example of that, what that might look like. Here in 1 second, I will. Let's end this with, as Joanna says, this area, this part of the chapter. Consciousness expands conscientiousness. Oh, I think that's doubled. I did double it. Consciousness expands the horizons of thought, promoting real health, which is expressed as balance before the cosmos. Since individuals are a miniature cosmos, the same laws govern both. This perfect concurrence between small focal points and the great focal point produces harmony, which is the universe's noblest manifestation. Consciousness expands the horizons of thought. I want to use an example, but it's not my example. It's an example I heard about somebody else, but it's very positive. I'm looking at the time, so we've got time to, I'll talk about it after because I didn't get this person's permission, so I'll talk about it after. Consciousness expands the horizons of thought. This is both positive or negative. I'll explain what I mean. Those of you might be seeing those previews for that new movie, Oppenheimer. Anyone? You heard about it. Okay. So basically it's about the gentleman, I don't forget his first name, Dr. Oppenheimer, who was the creator of the atomic bomb. When he came to the realization of how to create it, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, at that time, everyone in science, including Einstein, was saying it's not possible. All these great minds in science were saying, that's not possible. It's not possible to get nuclear energy in a consistent way and all these things. But Oppenheimer, he didn't think about wars and all that. He just was thinking about the possibility of science, because ultimately he was a scientist, he was a researcher. So his mind was far above and beyond open. It expanded his horizons. And in this way, when we are able to look at our conflicts from a bigger perspective and to change our perspective, to process that conflict, that promotes real health. She goes on to say, as she finishes this chapter, conflicts that manifest in individuals' conduct and emotions are the effects of the incarnate spirit's level of evolution. The body, my body, our bodies, molding itself to the subtle nature of the paraspirit, reflects the need for progress, propelling the spirit toward incessant intellectual and moral transformation, its purpose, its quest. We're going to skip this little part, come back to it. Furthermore, given the history of their past lives, individuals still suffer conflicts that are suggested and transmitted to them by spirits who have been their followers or victims during such times. Due to the notable and frequent manifestation of conflict in people's lives, Allan Kardec asked the guardian spirits for clarification in question 361 of the Spirit's book. Where do a person's good or bad moral qualities come from? Where do a person's good or bad moral qualities come from? And for those of you who are watching on the web, feel free to drop this in the comments what you think the answer to question 361 of the Spirit's book is. The spirits say they reflect the qualities of the incarnate spirit. The purer the spirit, the more the person is inclined toward the good. End quote. Which is to say, free of conflict. Therefore, overcoming conflict occurs by means of enormous effort on the part of those who want to attain plenitude. And that is where she ends. And we wanted to give an example to illustrate this point here when she says, given the history of our past lives, individuals still suffer conflicts that are suggested and transmitted to them by spirits who have been their followers or victim during such times. We wanted to give you an example of this. We've read in different books of Andrea Louise, some of the psychograph works of Divaldo Franco, and Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. You can look up those books. There are different examples, but there are a few examples that come to my mind, and I don't recall which book it's from, but it definitely was from one of the books that was psychographed by Divaldo, by the spirit Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. And it can't be that many books. It's like, there's only a few books that's translated from that particular spirit author into English. There's a case of a young man who suffers from a mental illness where he is plagued by these intrusive thoughts that really are so bothersome he cannot live a normal life. He has to be on medication, he has to be in therapy. And at that time in our society, people who had schizophrenia were institutionalized. We no longer do that. Thank God modern medicine has come up with still not perfect ways to manage it, but a lot of better ways than what they would do 50 to 100 years ago, which was very barbaric to these individuals who are ultimately suffering. So there was a particular case, a gentleman who was schizophrenic and had these intrusive thoughts. So these thoughts that didn't make any sense to anyone around him. And they were thoughts of, I'll give an example because I don't want to go into the long depth of the actual case, but they were thoughts of buying slaves. Here was this gentleman. He was not living in a time of slavery. He did not come from a racist family. There were no indications of why this would have presented itself in this life. But he seemed to have this fixation, fascination about obtaining slaves and doing all sorts of things around that. And he had great paranoia and issues. So when the spirit mentor was explaining the behind the scenes of why this was happening, he said that he was under a deep and heavy obsession from these spirits who were his former victims that had found him in this life and that were persecuting him. Now, the interesting thing Joanna says about obsession, and she says this in the book, I believe it's Existential Conflicts by Joanna de Angelis and Divaldo Franco, or it's the book Family Constellation, same author, same medium, where she says that when we are born, every person on this earth, when they are born, may carry a certain matrix within us. Now, whether that's in our physical body, in our paraspirit, in our, maybe it's all three, but we carry this matrix, in other words, this potential to experience obsession. It's sort of like, if you will, a crack in the glass, where if enough water goes through, it's going to burst open. So it's an area within ourselves that we know we have struggled in or done something wrong in the past. It's a conflict within us that, depending upon our lives, how we live our lives, can become activated. And it allows for these spirit obsessions. So imagine it kind of like a plug and what's the thing called? The tomada, what is that called? Thank you. I'm American. I don't know why I can't think of an English word. The outlet. Thank you. The outlet and the plug. So sometimes we have these little openings within us that when our previous victims, they find us, they plug into us, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe this, in a very easy fashion, if you will, if we are not living a very balanced life. And even if we are living super balanced, there's still that matrix, as Joanna calls it, this possibility. That's why the following is so important. That when we talk about conflicts in our lives, how does Joanna touch on this particular chapter when it comes to conflicts? She says we must use logic, we must confront it. But how do I do that if I'm not self-aware?
With humor.
With humor, okay.
What doesn't kill you, make you strong.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, how do I become so there's a saying, I don't know what I don't know. So how do I know what I don't know?
Be humble.
Does that make me aware of what I don't know?
At least accept that you are not Dr. Know-all and you are
Dion is saying be humble, to know that we don't know everything. Okay?
Be humble.
Be humble.
Acknowledge.
Be humble and change. Well, how do I change if I don't know I need to change?
Somebody will let you know.
Somebody will let you know.
Somebody will tell you.
Confronting ourselves.
Orlando is saying, asking other people.
Asking other people. Or if you're brave enough, and this is only for the brave, You don't ask other people. You know who you ask? Yourself. It's the man in the mirror. Confronting yourself, your fears, and these are our words, not Joanna's, but a summation of what she says. Confront yourself, your fears, your inner conflicts, not running away from your problems. They can make you stronger if you walk through them instead of running away from them. And ways we can fortify ourselves to face our conflicts: prayer. What else could we do? Meditation, yoga, exercise. If you are ever feeling in that state of conflict and you are feeling like you're in a lower mood, science has proven that if you just move your body and stretch, that's why yoga is so good. Stretching and just that physicality helps us to move that energy, helps us just to kind of get out of our own head, to reset. Because why do we come to this? Many reasons why we come to Spiritist Center, but one of the reasons when we receive passes, when we come to Spiritist Center, helps to clear that energy that gets stuck so we can think more logically. Because what happens, we get stuck in our own emotions. Some people say, oh, I get stuck in my own head. Whatever, however you feel like resonates with you to describe it, but we get that feeling of being stuck. So prayer, meditation, cultivating good thoughts. Anything else? Reflecting, inner reflections. What about watching uplifting content, whether it's audio or visual? Attending your Spiritist Center. Why? We talked about this at our recent retreat. It gives us a support system. We need our village. We need one another. And the spiritual blessings, because we are immortal beings, and we're going to end here. We are immortal beings. We carry with us a great deal of our own experiences from previous lives. And along with those experiences are other people that are connected to us. Those people don't always have a physical body. And so those spirits will inevitably may find us, may catch up with us, and affect our lives. So this idea, these would be the ways for us to, like the starting point. Where do I begin? Let us pray and ask for guidance. Let us pray and ask for courage. Let us pray not to take away the challenge, but to help us face our challenges. So, dear friends, we thank you so much for listening to us. We apologize for being 8 minutes over. I'm going to go see Daniel if there are any other questions oops, where is it? There we go. Any questions or comments we should share? Oh, Orlando says we are. To me, it sounds like Joanna said we need purpose. Love it. Perfect, Orlando. We absolutely need purpose. And Joanna talks a lot about setting goals for ourselves and how important that is for our overall health. And he says, which sounds easier said than done. Yeah, everything is easy. Anything that's good and worthwhile is easier said than done. And so Orlando is quoting this book that's a favorite book of mine, called The Body Keeps the Score. And it is by a Swedish, Norwegian author, famous, The Body, I always forget his name. Bethel van der Kerk, Dr. Bethel van der Kerk. It's an excellent book. If you ever want to learn more about yourself, the actual book is called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. It is an excellent book that shares a ton of research, but a great deal of the journey of this particular, I want to say he's a psychiatrist. It's absolutely excellent if you want to understand inner conflicts. Excellent book. Thank you for mentioning that. Razara says, Kirsten, thank you so much for this talk. Thank you, Razara, for being here with us. Thank you. Thank you, Orlando. Thank you, everyone else. Thanks for your, okay. So anything else, Daniel? Okay. I'll pause here. I think we tried to be interactive during our talk, so it's not as, for lack of a better word, boring. Are there any last comments anyone wanted to share or to make, or thoughts that they had? Isabel, did I see your hand up? No? Oh, I don't have my glasses or my contacts in. I can't see. She was so talkative at a retreat. I missed it. I wanted to make sure she got the opportunity to talk here as well. So we wish for all of you to have the courage to face your own self and pray about it. So this brings us to our end part of this part of our meeting. And we will transition to our passes moment. Daniel will put on the music here in just a moment. And we'll do our end prayer to give thanks and to close out.